if you've been in a role that you don't love or a company that you don't love, you feel it and it affects so much of your life. And then when you find the place you want to be a part of, you're like, wow, I get it. And you really do like literally shine brighter.
It is my absolute pleasure to welcome to our podcast episode today, Karen Weeks. Karen is a Hollywood deserter turned self proclaimed HR nerd and a shining coach with a passion for empowering individuals to find their inner spark. So, as the Chief People Officer at Ordergroove and the founder of Shine Network Coaching, with over 2 decades of experience as an HR leader, Karen brings a unique perspective to the table today. She also has a career development podcast called Shine Network that you guys can check out and authored Setting the Stage, a guide to preparing for any feedback conversation. So she knows a thing or two about feedback, sharing actionable advice, and communication, our topic for today. Karen, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So when I first read your profile, what drawn me to you was like your background in theater. It was so intriguing, and it got me thinking about like the parallels between acting and communicating on stage compared to in the workplace. So as a former stage manager working with actors, like being really like conscious, I guess, about like how you portray messaging through words, tone, facial expression, body language, all that. What are the top lessons you learned from theater that you bring to your work as a coach and in giving feedback?
Yeah, and I think it's really important because this was one thing that I actually talked to a lot of people about is that you bring a lot of transferable skills with you when you change careers. So as a stage manager, my job was to work with all the people every day to put up the show, designers, directors, actors, audience members, everybody. And so I literally do that every single day. I think about how business owners are trying to hit their goals. I work with managers to help them lead their teams. I work with the individuals on the teams to help them think about their careers. Then in my coaching world, I'm helping different people with their careers. So it's really about finding all the different ways that people need to communicate. And so I love DISC, Myers Briggs, Strength Finders, like whatever tool you like. It doesn't matter which one, but really recognizing that everybody's an individual and everybody's coming at something from a different perspective, with a different personality, with a different goal. So, how can we bring everybody together? And so, you really have to figure out how to adjust your style for the different people you talk to. And I was doing that back in the day as a stage manager, and now I've done that my whole HR career as well.
That's so difficult to juggle. I mean, when you're working with a lot of different stakeholders and kind of being conscious of how do I communicate to each one, like it can get kind of, messy in your mind. Are there any tips you can give to effectively communicate to different audiences and different stakeholders?
Yeah, I think one is figuring out with the way they take in information, the way they make decisions. So some people might need some information up front, take a little time to digest, and can then help solve the problem or make a decision. Other people want to talk things out. Some people are much more relationship based, some people are more data based. So sort of knowing what they need in that moment to make the decision, receive the feedback, whatever you're trying to do with them. And then I think the second thing is to remind everybody that we're all trying to achieve the same goal. If we're all in the same company, we all want the same things. We just may be having a different perspective. We may have different ideas on how to get there. We may not have all of the context. So always assuming best intention, assuming competence, starting from a good place, then we just have a hurdle and we just need to work through it.
It sounds like, well, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is effective communication really starts with empathy,
Yes.
right? And we were talking with a future of work expert, Wagner Denuzo, and he was saying that genuine leadership has to start with genuine conversations and listening. So, can you share any strategies or best practices for fostering an environment where employees feel comfortable having real conversations with their managers and leadership?
I've been a big fan of the book Five Dysfunctions of a Team for the last probably 12 years. And that talks about the only way to have a successful team is that it starts with trust. And the only way to build trust is to create the space for those conversations. So when I talk to new managers, I work with them a lot on how to just have good one on ones, how to get to know the humans on your team, because then you can have the conversations that you're referring to. You can create the space for difficult, uncomfortable, however you want to phrase it, conversations. You can recognize that people have stuff going on in their lives that they might be bringing to work or the other way around. So, really, just carving out the space for how was your weekend on a scale of 1 to 10? How's your week going? What would have made it a 10? What can I be doing as your manager to help you have a better week or remove some roadblocks? What's a win you want to celebrate? What's something you're really proud of? What's something you're doing outside of work that really excites you? Just asking those really honestly basic questions, but just creates more of a relationship and a trusted relationship. Then everything will grow from there.
Oh my gosh, Karen, you're speaking to someone who is so bad at like small
Oh,
talk.
yeah.
So these tips are really, really helpful. But you mentioned like difficult conversations. And I feel like now in the world of work where a lot of people are leaving their jobs and there's also like, a lot of tech layoffs and all these like crisis situations, like how can managers and team leaders effectively create this culture that it's okay to have these difficult conversations with them, make their employees feel comfortable talking to them about these things?
Yeah, I think sometimes it starts with the manager being vulnerable as well. You mentioned empathy. I think vulnerability is another really key piece of it. So, especially over the last couple years when we were really in the height of the pandemic, I was telling managers, look, tell your teams that you're struggling too. Whatever might be going on at home, personally, in work, everything that was compounding everything at that time, it was okay to say, I don't know the answers. I'm really burnt out. I'm having a hard time balancing everything. I'm feeling really isolated, whatever they were going through, because that then creates the space of we're going to feel these things. It's okay to feel these things and it's okay to talk about those things. And then if employees are struggling with something, or if they're not sure it's the right place for them, or they're not feeling valued, whatever they might be going through that might be helping them think about if this is the right place for them, they've sort of created that safe space for those conversations. I think the other thing I always tell managers is tell people it's okay to leave. We don't want them to if it's still obviously a good relationship and a good place to be. But if it doesn't fit what's right for the employee anymore, that's okay. My husband and I were just talking about this over the weekend. We don't live in a world where people stay at companies their whole careers. Honestly, we expect people to leave. It's how we get great talent is because they left someplace else to come to our company. But if we can do that in a respectful and supportive way and tell people from the beginning, I want you here as long as it makes sense. I want you to be hitting your career goals. I want you to be excited about what you're doing. I want you to know you're making an impact. And if some point that it doesn't feel that way, let's talk about it. Because I'd rather have that conversation than just all of a sudden out of nowhere you give 2 weeks notice and it could have been something we could have changed and made better for you here at this organization.
It's funny because I was just talking to another amazing Karen, Karen Gregory, and we were discussing like their vulnerability in leadership.
Mhm.
And she mentioned that it's very difficult for some leaders to give up that control and be vulnerable. So, as a coach, like, how do you get people that are so used to being like,
Yeah.
perfect in the eyes of everyone else to kind of give up control and be vulnerable among their peers and their employees, their teams?
Yeah, sometimes ask them to share stories of leaders that they've really respected, and often you'll start to hear vulnerability come through some of that. So, one leader that I've always really respected from way early in my career, she was very honest about when she had to take PTO, and she would go off the grid. Like her and her family would go to Idaho or something like that because she was very honest with, I need this time to refresh. This is a really demanding job and I love it, but I have to take the time to be with my family or I'm not going to be the best leader for this organization. And I always thought that was because this was back in the early 2000s. So we didn't talk about refresh and all that as much back then. So I really respected the fact that she was open with how she needed that time for her and her family in order to be a great leader. So I think if you ask people, well, who are some leaders you respect, or what kind of leader do you want to be? The vulnerability will be in there. And as a coach, sometimes I can help pull that out of them and see it as a strength versus a weakness.
I feel like maybe sometimes it's easier to be vulnerable when, we see ourselves as like human and see our
Yes.
teams as like people because we just share. It's like, a friendship also that
Yeah.
is formed in at work. But when it comes to like news from the organization, for example, like layoffs, how do we approach that? Because then we sort of have to protect the image of the company as well, and it's not our news to share.
Yeah, I think as honest and as transparent as you can be while being respectful of what's happening in the organization. So many people tell me when they're impacted by layoffs, oh, I just wish you had told me this was coming. I wish you had told me this was a possibility. And as much as I would love to do that, sometimes that's not possible. For anyone who's been on the other side of layoffs, that list may be changing. You don't know the timing. You don't know the packages you can offer. So it often is, while you're doing a lot of prep, all those final decisions often happen at the very last minute. And so that's why you can't always project what's happening. So, what I think you can do is when the moment happens, how can you support both the individuals that are impacted and the individuals that are quote unquote left behind? So, everybody feels respected. It's okay to say, I don't know. So, especially as a manager, you may not know all the answers because the decisions sort of made, like you said, around you. So, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer. Let me see if I can find out some information and I'll try to come back to you with more that I can find out, and then just communicating as much as possible. So never promise that more layoffs are not coming because you don't know that. So
Right.
say, we're trying to make the decisions that are best for the business to help us all get to the place that we can get to. We will help the people through it as much as we can through transition packages, through helping them find other jobs. And then, as a manager, especially if you're working with someone who was impacted, just saying, hey, if there's anyone in my network I can introduce you to, let me know. If you want me to look at your resume, let me know. Anything you can do to help them, just support them and let them know they're not alone. My biggest thing, though, is two things never to say to someone who is laid off. I'm sorry, because even though you may be sorry, you don't have control over the situations. I'm sorry is usually something like I did and I would have changed it. You kind of
Right.
can't change it. So I know this is hard. I know this is frustrating. I know this is scary. Those are words that are fine. And then never say, this is hard for me too. Because while it might be, right? Like I've laid off a lot of people in my career. I've fired a lot of people, unfortunately. It does. It stinks. It's a lot
Yeah.
harder for the other person because they're the
Right.
ones without a job. So
And
I
be
will
like,
get
oh,
over it. I'll be fine. You don't have a job. This is way more impactful to you. So those are always my two tips for managers that are struggling in those moments. Is really focus on supporting the person and being as honest as possible.
it's like being a great leader is just being a good, genuine human being,
Yes. Yes.
which isn't always easy. It's difficult. Um, but moving forward, not just in communication, but like as a coach, as someone who is trying to design a culture as well in Order Group, like what do you think are the top elements of a work culture that help create that environment where employees and everyone can shine?
Yeah, it's a great question. And partially it really depends on your organization. I coach an HR leader who is at like a cybersecurity, very compliant based company. Her culture is going to look different than a tech startup in e commerce
Right.
because there's just different pieces of the business. So, one thing I always tell people is your culture needs to be right for your organization because it is going to be a little different no matter what. Things that we care about at Ordergroove are individuality. So a lot of the things that we do we're still relatively small. We're only 120 people. So we're really still allowed to do and have the ability to do things that are very customized for individuals. So that's one thing that we really want to focus on is what is right for your authentic self and how we can support that and how can you shine as who you are at Ordergroove. And then the other thing that is really important to us is we are still in these different stages of we're learning things. They may work, they may not. So we call it we're comfortable being uncomfortable. So riding
Mhm.
that roller coaster of things are going to change. There's going to be ambiguity. And for the right people, that's a lot of fun and exciting. For other people, it's like, I really need more of a playbook. I think I need to be further along with a company that's further along. And that's totally okay. So I think identifying for your culture, how do you work together? How does the business function? What does good look like across the team? And then finding those values that represent that, and then really living and bringing to life those values, because that's what helps create the culture.
So, in your experience, I mean, yes, every organization is different and therefore the culture will be different. Are there really times when an individual doesn't fit into that culture and they just don't belong there?
Yeah.
Or is this something that, I don't know, like we're naturally adaptive to whatever culture there is in the company?
I think honestly it's a little bit of both. I think people can adapt. And I think that's why you see some people start at like a 20-person company and grow with them to 1,000 people. Clearly that culture is going to evolve during that time. And so the person had to adapt as well. But I
Mm.
do think there are some people that like a lot more structure or a lot more process or know what their day to day is going to look like. There are some cultures that will be supportive of that, and there'll be some cultures that will feel like chaos to them. And so that might not be the right thing. I think to your question around fit, I think that's really more about competencies, values, and how the business works and how people communicate and that kind of stuff. It is not, do I want to have a beer with this person? It's
Right.
not some of the diversity issues that come up when you think about culture fit sometimes. It's not, do they have ping pong and like, free whatever. It's really more about how do we work together in this community that we've created that is this business. And that will feel right to some people and not feel right to other people.
I'm curious about your work with Ordergroove because at Erudite we're also a growing tech company. So, like, what are the unique HR challenges that you faced in the tech industry when it comes to designing the work culture, and
Yeah.
how did you adjust them?
I think one is communication, which is perfect for our topic
Yeah.
today. Especially as we've grown, people who used to be in all the meetings maybe now aren't in all the meetings because we're a bigger company now. They used to wear a lot of hats, and maybe now we have more specialists versus generalists. There might be different management layers. And on paper, those are all good things. It means we're growing. It means you might have a manager that can really give you more time. It means that you're able to actually focus and not try to have to do all the things, but that's change. And so I think there's a lot of change that happens in especially growing tech companies. And so helping with those communication pieces, helping people feel like they still are tied to the work that they're doing, they understand the impact to the broader business, they don't feel out of the loop. So maybe you're not in the meeting anymore, but maybe there's a debrief that comes out of that meeting. So really just helping people grow with the company. And so communication is a big piece of that. I think the other piece, frankly, is setting expectations. So, what is not only the expectations in your role, but what could your career look like at this company? And for some people, that may be sort of more linear. I want to go from X to senior X to manager of X to et cetera. Other people might still be figuring that out. And so I love it when people can change departments. We've had people go from marketing to client services or client services to product. And so that's really great because you're exploring and figuring this out as you go. But that takes time, right? Like, I'm not just going to give you a job because you want it. So, understanding the expectations of what career development looks like and how I can support you, but how you're a partner in that. And together we will figure this out based on your development and the needs of the business. So I think the communication and then the career development are two things that really have always stood out to me at tech startups. And honestly, a lot of that is tied to change and navigating change during all these times.
Yeah, like that's the beauty I feel of working in a tech
Yeah.
startup. If you want to try something, it's so easy to like talk to someone and be like, I want to know more about that. I want to be part of that project. But it's true, like the growth part of it now, like our company grew a ton like the past few months, and their faces in the meetings, I'm like, I don't even know who this
Yeah.
person is. But like, how do you keep a team connected when it grows so quickly? It's like sometimes it feels overwhelming to think that I have to have like one-on-ones
Yeah.
with every new hire, you know?
Yeah. Well, and especially for companies that are remote, that's a lot harder. When I used to see people in the kitchen all the time, it was a lot easier to sort of keep
Right.
track of everybody and know how everybody was doing and spending even just 5 minutes because it was more organic. Now, a lot of that has to be more purposeful because we have to schedule a Zoom call and do all the things. So I think one thing that Ordergroove has done is one, we use a Slack app called Donut, which
Oh
creates
my gosh,
virtual
yes.
coffees. Yeah.
We
Big
use
fan
that,
of
yeah.
that. Yes. And it's nice because it really does, in theory, create. We do it in groups of four. We found that one-on-ones were a
Okay.
little too intense. So
Yeah.
we did groups of four. But in theory, you should be meeting people that you don't work with day to day. So that's been really great. The other thing we do is quarterly, we do small group virtual events. And so we have people from out the organization. It's not an HR led thing. We help organize it, but we don't lead it. And
Okay.
it's really about hobbies. So we might have origami, we did a drawing class, we did a mixology class, pizza
And
making,
is this like
video
virtual
games.
or like face to face?
Yeah, so it's all on Zoom. And
Okay.
basically, you sign up for a room. So, whatever it was, May 8th, I'm just picking a random date.
Yeah.
There are these five virtual rooms. You go into the one you want to go to. It's pizza making, it's mixology, and it's like whatever. And you just go hang out with those people and do the thing. And it's very cross functional, it's very casual. But that has been a really nice small group activity where, again, people who aren't normally together are getting to
Right.
know each other, doing something fun. So there's a purpose. So it's not this awkward, like just all staring at each other, but you get to really know each other through that. And that's been a really successful thing that we've done.
I love that. I love these initiatives. I'm going to like share it with our with our
Yes.
HR team as well. But like I'm guessing it's also important that the company and the leadership invest in these
Yeah.
things because it takes time, it takes resources. So how do you like how
Yeah.
important is leadership buy-in and how do you win over the people leaders, the influencers and the executive team to build this positive work culture?
Yeah, I think part of it is honestly speaking their language. So if you really have a leadership team that's like, that's silly, why would we do that? Like, really doesn't
Yeah.
get it, tying it back into any of the business goals. So, there's tons of data out there that shows teams that have stronger relationships and know each other better are then more productive, drive better results, drive higher quality. So like find that data and use that with your leaders because that's what they care about if they're missing this sort of human element. And then also recognizing, and we want you to be a part of this. And so sometimes, people are at different stages of their lives. Sometimes leaders might have families, might have other commitments, might be just exhausted at the end of the day, or you might have people across the country, so it's hard figuring out time zones. So being flexible and doing things at different times. So maybe, one event is at the end of the day, maybe another event is more like a breakfast thing. And that might be better for the leaders and say, we want you to be a part of this. So
Right.
let's do it at different times. And maybe that might help as well. So speak their language and then try to be flexible so that they can be a part of it and do something that you know that they'll like. If you know your CEO is into basketball, like watch one of the playoff games here in the States, it's the NBA playoffs. So do a virtual playoff game watching or something, and maybe he or she will come to that. So there's sort of different ways to get them more involved.
I love that because like if they are a part of it, they feel it. They also feel
Yes.
the effects because sometimes yes, data helps, but the experience like speaks for itself.
Yeah.
So I love that. We're gonna
Yeah.
we're so gonna use that as well. Okay, so speaking of leadership, and the leader table,
Yeah.
our team went to Unleash in Vegas recently, and their favorite takeaway was that the pandemic gave HR a seat at the leadership table,
Mhm.
and HR will not give that up now. So, do you feel, as a chief people officer, you have more power and influence now after the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually just went to an event with Troop HR, which is another sort of HR networking group. And we were all together and we were talking about the same thing. And I think in some places, yes, especially as people are thinking about remote and hybrid, and they're really recognizing how HR is going to continue to help them figure out those things. I do think the flip side of that is that HR is really burnt out. A lot of us were talking about that we were powering through the last few years. Our adrenaline was rushing through the last few years. We got the seat at the table. We were helping make these really important decisions, and we never took a moment for ourselves. So I think our companies still want us there, and I know we want us to be there, but I think we also need to recognize the last few years have been hard. So it's also okay to say, I'm still at the table, but I need to take this week off and I'll be back at the table next week. Or I need to prioritize a couple things that are coming from those conversations because I actually can't do it all. So I do think the conversations continue to evolve where HR is such a key partner and the businesses recognize that. I just think we need to make sure we're giving ourselves a chance to breathe as well.
Do you feel like there's a good like support system between like among HR professionals, and like do you think you have like a unifying mission that drives you together?
Yeah, I think we do because I think there's this feeling, and maybe I'm feeling this more right now because I just came from this retreat. But I really do think there's this like, we are in this together. We all recognize what's going on. And so we are here for each other. And honestly, some of my coaching clients are HR people who are a team of one or a really small team or a first time HR leader who's like, can someone just help me figure out what this is all? I know you've been there before. Can you just, be there with me now? And so we do need to lean on each other. And I think that sense of community is so important.
Okay, so to tie this all together, because we're coming to a close, what's your hope for the future of work and workplaces?
Yeah, I think one thing is that we really take the lessons that we've learned over the last few years and keep those top of mind. So, understanding the humans in front of us have a lot going on. So, whether you're still remote and people have things like construction happening at their house on a given day, that's distracting for the person that you might be talking to, or people who have kids, or, whatever. If they're remote, that's still happening. Or if you are going back into the office, that's an adjustment for people if you were remote for a while. So just recognizing that there are still humans and they are trying to figure all of this out. So that's one thing I hope that stays with us is that the future of work remembers that work is done by humans and we need to value and respect them. But also recognize that as business evolve, we really need to support our leaders and our HR partners. You asked a great question earlier about vulnerability. We are actually not perfect. Spoiler alert, leaders don't know what they're doing, HR people don't know what they're doing. So being open to supporting them in their own development. We spend a lot of time developing our teams. We do make sure we take time to develop ourselves as leaders and HR people. So really kind of carving out the time to do that. So I think the future of work is recognizing the humans, supporting everybody in the business in their development, and recognizing that we're all in this together and we'll figure it out as we go.
I love that. I will have one more question just because, like, in your podcast, you always say that, you want to support people and make sure that, or we all deserve, I'm not sure what you say. You say, like, we all deserve, like, a career and a job and work that lights us up,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think that's what you say. So, to everyone that's listening, whether they work in HR or if they're like people leaders or aspiring leaders, like, what's your message to kind of, I don't know, get ready and design a life and work that lights them up?
Yes. And I really believe because if you've been in a role that you don't love or a company that you don't love, you feel it and it affects so much of your life. And then when you find the place you want to be a part of, you're like, wow, I get it. And you really do like literally shine brighter. So that's where all of this came from. So I think first of all, and I just talked to someone else about this. You have a choice. Now you may choose to stay in the place that you are, even if it's not like the most ideal situation, but for whatever reason, it may make sense in that moment. And so recognize that. So really realize that. Think about what's important to you. Think about what you care about the most. What does light you up? And are you getting that today? And if not, where could you get it? Or if you are staying put for whatever reason, acknowledging that that is also a choice and lean into it and accept that. I'm a big proponent of accepting the things you can and cannot change and making those changes where you can. So find work you enjoy. And if for some reason you can't do that in this moment, that's okay. But just really lean into whatever opportunities are in front of you.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, and your sunshine with us today. For our listeners, I highly encourage you to check out Karen's podcast, Shine at Work, for more insightful discussions, tips, and even access to templates. I found like
Yes,
templates were very helpful.
absolutely.
To, yeah, to help you unlock your career potential. So thank you, Karen, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Seriously, thank you.